I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's June 3rd, 2025. Mayor Muriel Bowser in Washington, D.C. offers a budget proposal with cuts and regulatory changes. MCPS has released boundary change options as it plans the opening and reopening of 3 high schools. Complaints about air quality in Argyle Middle School. In Maryland, the Public Service Commission asks Baltimore Gas and Electric and Delmarva Power to spread out coming rate increases. Increases from PEPCO are likely coming soon. A lawsuit challenges the closed primary system in Maryland, and more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from CatScan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C. Paul Chaperas on bass, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synths and percussion. The songs we use in this episode are instrumental versions of songs they wrote for their latest album, Everything is Normal. You can find where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security listed and then removed a list of the so-called sanctuary jurisdictions, which practically covered half the country, 35 states and hundreds of counties and cities. California, Illinois, Colorado, Minnesota, among others, featured prominently, of course, but also Ohio and Virginia. In Maryland, the list included 9 of 24 jurisdictions, including Montgomery and Baltimore City. Many jurisdictions reject the term sanctuary city. Montgomery County, for example, has long maintained that it cooperates with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, called ICE, on violent criminals, and sees the Trump administration's immigration policy as hurting diverse communities. On Sunday, Fox News, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem did not acknowledge removing the list, but said that they had received pushback from cities. Alexandria, Virginia-based National Sheriff's Association, which represents 3,000 sheriffs across the country, did not hold back. This list was created without any input, criteria of compliance, or a mechanism for how to object to the designation. Sheriffs nationwide have no way to know what they must do or not do to avoid this arbitrary label, the statement said. And it went on. The completion and publication of this list has not only violated the core principles of trust, cooperation, and partnership with fellow law enforcement, but it also has the potential to strain the relationship between sheriffs and the White House administration. DHS has done a terrible disservice to President Trump and the sheriffs of this country. Meanwhile, Mayor Bowser in Washington, D.C. has proposed a budget which is making a lot of folks upset. With details of the budget proposal, here is Yashim Sain of the D.C. Policy Center.
The proposed budget totals to about $11.9 billion. That's just local funds. That's all the money we're raising to pay for this budget. And that's about an increase of 2.6% from the fiscal year 2025 budget, the revised one, which includes certain cuts to be compliant with the continuing resolution. And it also heavily relies on fund balance spending. We are putting about $1 billion of previous year's surpluses, another $200 million of surpluses we expect at the end of this year. So the budget is relying on about $1.2 billion of money from other years. That means our recurring expenditures are still $1.2 billion over our recurring revenues. What is interesting is the 4-year financial plan, which is something that the district has to do, has to balance this 4-year financial plan. This is the first time I have seen in a very long while where the very last year of the 4-year financial plan, which is 2029, where the recurring revenue and recurring expenditure align. This is the first year I've seen these future year cuts have been made explicit. In the past, in the financial plan, we would make some funny assumptions like really low or even negative inflation, declining healthcare costs, which are, so that the numbers align, and say, we'll deal with this problem next year. But this year, something has changed. We're cutting education spending by 4% starting next year. Some of the things that the city has committed to, for example, every year we commit $70 million to this thing called Pay Equity Fund, which supplements the salaries of childcare workers. That's only for this year. Next year, it disappears. A lot of the benefits have been curtailed back. Eligibility requirements have been changed. But a lot of the benefits that have cost of living adjustments will no longer have cost of living adjustments. We're punting labor union contracts to next year and the year after. Part of it is to shift spending from 25, where we have this made-up constraint, but also declaring that even though we're pushing contracts forward, we're not going to make any retroactive pay increases, which is something that district has done regularly. The mayor's budget is basically telling us we've made some hard decisions this year. We're actually making even harder decisions next year. But look, we have this growth agenda. We're investing in downtown. We're bringing this football team. We're bringing back tipped wage. We're getting rid of a sales tax increase. And these are all going to create growth. Will we be able to achieve this in a year or 2 or 3 or 4? It's to be seen. What we're not seeing is increase in revenue forecast by the CFO.
If there was a year when the mayor could, in fact, legitimately cut and blame somebody else, this would be it.
She's doing something important. She's creating structural balance in the budget. The budget will go to the council. Obviously, they have a chance to turn this thing the other way. They can change the mayor's budget whichever way they want. But I'm not seeing any appetite for tax increases in the council. That means whatever they do, if they increase housing money, they're going to have to cut back money for the libraries. Or if they change social safety net spending, they're going to have to do something else on, some other thing. And the investments in economic growth, the growth agenda, they're not very high. They're basically regulatory reforms, like reforms to Tenant Support Into Purchase Act, eviction reforms, some investments in downtown, some marketing campaigns, but they're not really, we're not taking $300 million and putting in some economic development project, except for, if you call it an economic development project, except for the football stadium.
Economic development is, finicky. It's not predictable. You do something, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. These investments that are being made, is there any projections from the mayor's office for how they will?
We haven't seen that. I think because of the way that the DC government is structured, I'm sure that there's an estimate somewhere about the potential economic benefits, but the arbiter of that decision is the chief financial officer. So there's no reason to go out and say billions of dollars will fall from the sky if the CFO is not going to certify that revenue. So everybody is in a wait and see environment. With the RFK side, it's a pile of rocks right now. So whatever you put in there is going to be better than what it is right now. But, we look at the baseball stadium and say, this is an investment that really paid off. The stadium, the soccer stadium, it's an investment that's paying off. But remember, we opened the baseball stadium when? 97, 98?
That's right.
It took a very long time. The Navy Yard took a very long time. There's still cranes up there. There's still empty lots.
The federal government was growing. I mean, I think fundamentally that's the change.
It was an anchor, for sure. It attracted talent. It attracted companies. It also created stability. Right now, there isn't a national recession, but there's definitely a regional recession. Families used to move out to the city when their kids hit the age of 5. First, we did universal kindergarten. I mean, childcare is expensive. So people are like, wait, a year of free school, I'll stay a year. And then you send your kid to kindergarten and you say, oh, wait a minute, this is not bad. We can stay here for 5 more years.
So you see what the budget is doing is like cutting those things that make actually DC attractive to live in. So in fact, people will go back to leaving DC at the, when you hit age of 5. Somehow education is not economic development.
All of these go hand in hand. But in a tough time, the administration made some cuts. It was unavoidable. Preserved many things this year. Some things are funded at lower rates, obviously.
Yashim Sayin, thank you for following this for us.
Of course.
Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland is looking at opening or reopening 3 high schools in the next few years. And whenever that happens, school boundaries have to be adjusted and students redistributed to new schools, which is, of course, cause for major heartache to those who believe they will come out for the worse. The first 2 schools slated to open are Charles Woodward and the Northwood High Schools. Woodward is a brand new school located on Old Georgetown Road in North Bethesda, north of Walter Johnson High School, which is also of Old Georgetown near Montgomery Mall. Northwood is an existing high school on University Boulevard near Arcola Avenue and bookends the Kemp Mill neighborhood on the south. And it is getting a new building. Northwood is currently occupying the building, which will eventually become Woodward High School. The third new school being built is Crown High School in Gaithersburg near the Crown and Rio developments. Reorganizing the catchment areas feeding into the 3 new schools is forcing reconsideration of school boundaries across the entire county. Woodward is forcing changes to West and Down County schools, including Northwood, and Crown High School, together with the expansion of Damascus High School, is leading to changes up county. MCPS has now issued initial options for the 2 school boundary student redistribution studies. But details will matter. Families want answers to who will stay and who will leave their existing school communities. In the Down County, Blair, Northwood, Einstein, Wheaton, and Kennedy high schools make up the Down County Consortium, where students have some choice in choosing which of the schools they want to attend. Each school houses specialist programs, and students interested in those programs can apply to them. So changes to Down County Consortium schools are less controversial. The boundary battle is likely shaping up on what the new boundaries will be for Walter Johnson High School. The new Woodward High School is located slightly north of Walter Johnson and will likely carve up the top half of the old Walter Johnson school boundary. This is going to happen, but to the east of Walter Johnson, especially across 355 Rockville Pike, in the Kensington area, 2 of the 4 options will send more Kensington area students to Walter Johnson, while the other 2 will send more Kensington students to Albert Einstein. Property values in the Walter Johnson catchment tend to be higher than property values in the Albert Einstein catchment, though the difference is closing fast. In the up-county reorganization, Northwest High School goes from being a long north-south district to a smaller, more compact catchment in all the 4 proposals. Quince Orchard moves south to sit atop the Churchill High School cluster. Overcrowded Clarksburg High School becomes tighter, and the Damascus expansion takes in more students. There are different proposals on whether to expand Watkins Mill High School to the East County line or to keep it all within Gaithersburg Heights. Some of the options on offer in both the Crown and Woodward studies surprisingly generate non-contiguous catchment boundaries, which are always politically hard to sell. You can find more details on the MCPS Boundary Study webpage. It's available with an easy Google search. Argyle Middle School, which feeds to Wheaton High School, which is under consideration for boundary change as well, has reported air quality issues. Jennifer Todd is a parent of an Argyle student.
Air quality at Argyle Middle School is not just problematic, but actually dangerous. I went to the school and they allowed me to go through some records, and I was shocked at the levels that the students are exposed to every day, all day. And this includes carbon dioxide, volatile organic compounds or VOCs, and also asbestos. I talked with some teachers. I talked with a nurse. I saw a pipe that was wrapped in asbestos, which is an old method of insulating piping. The building was erected in 1971. And not only was it exposed, but it was leaking water through the pipe, and the pipe had mold growing on it.
You said you looked at records of air quality testing.
A level that is considered very high is 1,431 parts per billion, and they have classrooms that were measuring over 8,000 parts per billion.
How many classrooms have 8,000 parts per billion?
I think there are about 3 that measured 8,000, at least half of them that have levels that fall into the very high, over 1,400.
VOC, is that mold?
Benzene falls into this, DDT, formaldehyde. If we have proper ventilation, when it was built in 1971, it was an open concept. There were just a few classrooms in an open area. And as the census of the school grew and our thinking about teaching changed, they put up walls. They put up lots of walls. That impeded the HVAC and how efficient it moves air through this building that was meant to be open.
What are they telling you? What is the school telling you? What's the central office telling you? Have you talked to them yet?
No, they have said nothing. The staff has brought it to the attention of the administration of the school.
Jennifer Todd, hope things get better.
Thank you so much.
Last week, the Maryland Public Service Commission asked Baltimore Gas and Electric, BG&E, and Delmarva Power to spread out coming rate increases. Electricity rates in Maryland are expected to go up quite a bit. We have covered the issue in depth across several episodes. The latest increase comes from the rise in the commodity price of electricity, which is deregulated, but governed by an auction that is held by the regional grid operator called PJM. Fred Hoover is the chair of Maryland's Public Service Commission.
Baltimore Gas and Electric made a filing with the Public Service Commission to implement a rate increase in the price of the electricity, the commodity that they provide, as opposed to the rates that they charge for their distribution from the PJM system that would have taken effect on June 1st. We reviewed their filing and decided to change the deployment of the rate increase over a longer period of time. So instead of having the rate increase take effect June 1, we have spread it out over a 6-month period. And principally what we wanted to do was to avoid the situation where this significant price increase in the electricity commodity that BG&E provides would occur at the same time that summertime usage would be going up in the months of June, July, and August. And while we couldn't reduce the rate increase that was coming through PJM, because it was a direct pass through, we did have the ability to spread it out.
How much of a rate increase did they ask for?
We were looking at probably an increase of $20 a month. So now by spreading it out, we're hopefully lowering it to more between $10 and $15 a month. Since this is the price of the product, it really depends on how much of it you use. So to the extent that you don't use as much, because the temperature is more moderate, the amount of money out of your pocket eventually is going to be lower than it would have been had this thing gone into effect on its regular schedule.
So if it's a PJM driven commodity price, why only BGE and Delmarva? Why not Pepco and others?
The auctions take impact on some of these companies at different times.
You're expecting filings from Pepco?
At some point.
A few days ago, the Office of the People's Counsel filed a complaint about these. Is that complaint now dealt with?
What we dealt with was the results of what PJM did. We don't regulate PJM. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission regulates them. What the action that the Office of People's Counsel filed its complaint on is asking the FERC to do is to take an examination of what PJM did in the conduct of this most recent auction and make some adjustments to that. So there is the potential, I don't want to put out a lot of hope on this, but there is the potential that, when FERC examines these issues, that there could be a reduction going forward at some point down the road.
The Office of People's Counsel's argument is also that BGE and Delmarva in particular owe their ratepayers refunds.
That could be part of this, depending on what FERC decides to do.
Can you please explain the capacity auctions and why prices go up and what commodity prices are as different from, the distribution costs? Because
we have a restructured electric industry. So BG&E doesn't own the power plants and the other energy generation sources anymore. They buy the electricity from a marketplace that PJM runs. So PJM is the official entity that runs the electric generation marketplace. And so PJM puts out a notice saying we need so much electricity for this period of time, and they invite all the people who own generating plants, and that includes renewable resources, coal plants, nuclear plants, natural gas plants, and they all make bids to say, we can sell you so much electricity at this particular price. And then PJM reviews all the bids that they get and selects supposedly the ones that are the most cost efficient according to the rules of the auction that they're conducting in order to fulfill the requirement that they have. And then once that's done, then they say, well, here's what the price of the electricity is going to be.
Do you think, though, that once the rate increases are allowed to go forward, even if they are spread over a time, that they are what they are? You're not going to roll them back.
Yes, it's probably an unusual occurrence, but there's been a lot of complaints raised by a lot of different entities, including the governor of this state, along with the governor of Pennsylvania and the other states, about how PJM has been operating. So there's a lot of concern that's been expressed by a lot of different entities about the way these auctions have been conducted, the way the rates have been charged. I'm not going to predict what they're going to do, but they have the same sort of mandate that I have, which is making sure that rates are just and reasonable.
When is the next time they can file for a rate increase?
Well, these capacity auctions usually take place like every 6 months or so. We're kind of on a June, December timetable.
Do you expect it to go up more, the commodity price?
PJM's been talking about the fact that, there is this need for generation resources, and the Maryland General Assembly just passed a big bill to try and encourage the development of generation resources within the state of Maryland. The theory is that if the need is there, that people will, in fact, build generation facilities.
Even a natural gas plant is going to take 4 or 5 years to come online. And so you really haven't, for the 4 or 5 years, rates are going to go up.
And so that's why other ideas have been pitched to PJM to say, maybe we need to focus on how much electricity is being used. And so, create some rules regarding data centers if they potentially come in and start using a whole lot of electricity. Try to have PJM focus on other ways of dealing with energy usage, battery storage projects, demand response programs, and things like that.
What is your timeline for the data center rules?
Again, that's another proceeding in front of FERC, so they're sort of working through that. But I think they.
Oh, you have to wait for the FERC? I thought that Maryland was going to have.
Well, so within Maryland, we are sort of dealing with data centers on. The main thing that will happen here is if a data center shows up and decides they want to use a lot of electricity at the time they're looking to be sort of certificated within the utility, there'll probably be an examination by the commission as to what rate ought to be charged to them. So we haven't had any of that yet.
Right, but you only control the distribution costs. You don't control the commodity price at all. That's the main concern.
And so that's a separate proceeding that's going on in front of FERC, is trying to figure out what rules they're going to make for that going forward. And they've talked about they understand the need to do this. They just haven't done anything yet.
Fred Hoover, thank you. Please come back as this develops.
Always glad to talk.
A lawsuit in Anne Arundel County, led by former Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford, a longtime independent who joined Larry Hogan's Republican ticket, contests whether state taxpayers should foot the bill for closed primaries that benefit the major parties alone. Todd Eberly is a political science professor at St. Mary's College of Maryland.
In this particular case, they're not challenging, per se, the legality of closed primaries. What they're saying is if there are closed primaries, these primaries should not be funded by taxpayers. Because what you're saying to unaffiliated voters is you have to foot the bill for these primary contests, but you're not allowed to participate in them unless you at least temporarily choose to join a political party. And, that seems to be wrong. Basically telling people that the only way you get to participate in who's going to be the nominee is if you decide to affiliate with a party, even if it's only for as long as it takes to fill out a ballot.
Is this the first time that someone has filed a lawsuit on this basis rather than on the legality basis? What is the history of opposition to closed primaries in Maryland?
Yeah, I can't speak beyond the state of Maryland. It's the first time I've seen this question raised in Maryland, which is the financing of it. The challenging of closed primaries is not something that is unique or new. In fact, there was a recent case in the state of Florida where an unaffiliated voter challenged the closed primaries in that state. And that actually made it to the 11th Circuit Court, which ultimately upheld a lower state court ruling that closed primaries were fine. But what was really interesting about that 11th Circuit opinion was, one, they found that the unaffiliated voter absolutely had standing. In other words, could demonstrate that he was injured in some way by this. But perhaps more importantly, in the opinion, said that this was a question that was ripe for reconsideration. Because the Supreme Court, back in 1976, I believe it was, upheld closed primaries. And the 11th Circuit, in the opinion, basically said, a lot has changed since then. There are far more independent voters now. I can talk about some other things that have changed that really make this a different time than it was in 76. But you've got this case in Florida. You've got this case that's now in Maryland. I can see this being part of sort of a long game strategy to get a case before the Supreme Court in hopes that they might revisit that 1976 decision.
What about within Maryland? Have there been other lawsuits that have contested the idea here?
I believe there have been other lawsuits challenging closed primaries, but not based on the question of publicly financing them. But there hasn't been a great degree of sympathy either in the legislature or in the Maryland courts to the argument. And largely this stems from the fact that we have a Supreme Court precedent from the 70s that says that closed primaries are fine. They don't violate our rights. And as long as you've got those precedents out there, the courts don't have a lot of wiggle room. And I think that's probably why in this particular case, they're approaching it from the angle of, again, it's fine. Parties want to have a closed primary. That's on them, but they should have to pay for it.
The former Republican lieutenant governor is kind of leading the charge here. Does this color the effort?
It adds a bit of gravitas to the case because you've got someone with that stature and someone who is affiliated with in the past advocating for open primaries. I think the coverage is more than it might have otherwise been. That's not a small thing. You certainly don't mind publicity in a case like this, because the other thing that they probably would like to do is try to put some pressure on the legislature, because ultimately the legislature could change this. They're the ones who have said that it's voluntary. If the parties want to open their primaries, they can. Odds are that's not something the General Assembly would pursue. Maryland is, at least at the statewide level, a one-party state. The Democratic Party, claims about 54% of registered voters. I don't know that they see a real need to open their primary. I would argue they're being a bit short-sighted in that, much as the Republican Party is. The Republican Party right now is at risk of falling behind unaffiliated voters in total registration. If the Republican Party wants to broaden its appeal, one of the smartest things they could do is open their primaries, bring unaffiliated voters into the Republican primary process, get nominees that are more likely to get broad-based support, and this could ultimately pose a bit of a threat to the Democrats. But until Republicans do that, I don't know that Democrats would see much motivation to change the law.
What states do you know already have primaries that are paid for by the parties?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a state where the parties are responsible for financing primaries. There are a lot of states where the primaries are open, and this has almost always been done through an act of the legislature.
Todd Eberle, thank you. We'll have to come back and plumb this further.
Oh, I'd love to. This would be great.
I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities of Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Cat Scan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C. Paul Chaperas on bass, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synths and percussion. You can find out where they are playing locally on their Facebook and Instagram pages. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.